Get out! This isn't a charity! Mario Romano's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. He stood in the doorway of Romano's Italian kitchen, his white apron stained with marinara sauce, pointing an angry finger at the homeless man sitting quietly on the bench outside his restaurant. The old man didn't look up. He never did. Just sat there in his faded army jacket, holes worn through the elbows, watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and amber. His weathered hands rested on a worn duffel bag, and his steel-gray beard caught the morning light. But today was different. Today, Mario had reached his breaking point. You hear me, old man? You're killing my business. Get moving! The veteran slowly lifted his head. Blue eyes, clear despite his age, met Mario's angry stare. No defiance. No anger. Just acceptance. The kind of quiet resignation that comes from a lifetime of disappointments. He stood up carefully, favoring his left leg, and slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. Without a word, he started walking down Oak Street, his combat boots silent on the sidewalk. Mario dusted off his hands, satisfied. Problem solved. But as the old man turned the corner, something small and metallic slipped from a torn pocket in his jacket. It hit the pavement with a soft ping and rolled to a stop near the restaurant's front door. Sarah Martinez was unlocking her car across the street when she heard the sound. She looked over and saw the glint of metal near the restaurant entrance. Curious, she walked over and picked it up. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a Purple Heart medal. Authentic. The kind that wasn't given out lightly. And suddenly, Sarah realized they had all just witnessed something unforgivable. But to understand what happened next, you need to know who Robert Bobby Hayes really was. 23 years ago, Bobby Hayes was living a very different life. He had a house in the suburbs, a wife named Ellen, 2 kids, and a job as a foreman at the Boeing plant. He was what you'd call a success story. A Vietnam veteran who'd made it home, built something with his hands, and never asked for recognition. The Purple Heart in that torn pocket? He'd earned it on March 15, 1971, outside Da Nang. Staff Sergeant Bobby Hayes had been leading a patrol when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. The blast threw his Humvee off the road and into a ditch. Bobby could have run. Could have taken cover. Instead, he went back into that burning vehicle 3 times to pull out his men. The 3rd time, the fuel tank exploded. The shrapnel took chunks out of his left leg and embedded metal fragments in his spine that would never come out. But he saved 4 lives that day. For young soldiers who went home to their families because one man decided their lives mattered more than his own safety. Bobby never talked about Vietnam. Not to Ellen. Not to the kids. Not to anyone. He just came home, got a job, and tried to forget. But forgetting, it turned out, was harder than remembering. The nightmares started small. Bad dreams that woke him up in cold sweats. Then came the drinking. Just a beer or 2 after work to quiet the voices in his head. The voices of the men he couldn't save. The faces that visited him every time he closed his eyes. Ellen tried to help. God knows she tried. But Bobby was drowning in memories, and he couldn't explain to her what it felt like to carry the weight of other people's deaths on your shoulders. The plant downsized in 2001. Bobby lost his job. Then he lost the house. Then Ellen left, taking the kids with her. I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore, she said on the day she packed her bags. I love you, but I can't save you if you won't save yourself. And just like that, Bobby Hayes became nobody. But here's what most people don't understand about homelessness: it's not always about addiction or mental illness or laziness. Sometimes, it's about shame. Sometimes, it's about a man who gave everything for his country and couldn't figure out how to live with what that service cost him. Bobby ended up on Oak Street because it was quiet. Because Romano's Italian kitchen reminded him of his grandmother's house in Chicago. Because sitting on that bench every morning, watching the sun come up over the city he'd fought to protect, was the only peace he'd found in 23 years. He never begged. Never asked for handouts. Never bothered anybody. He just existed. Mario Romano knew Bobby was there. Had known for years. But Bobby was bad for the image. Bad for business. The kind of problem you ignored until you couldn't ignore it anymore. Other business owners on the block had complained. What kind of neighborhood is this becoming, they'd ask. First it's one homeless guy, then it's 10. We need to nip this in the bud. So that Tuesday morning, Mario finally decided to act. What he didn't know was that someone else had been watching Bobby too. Sarah Martinez wasn't just any customer at Romano's. She was a social worker with the Chicago Veterans Administration. She'd been eating lunch at Mario's place every Tuesday for 2 years, and she'd noticed the old man on the bench. Something about him was different from the other homeless people she encountered in her job. He carried himself with a kind of dignity. A military bearing that time and hardship hadn't completely erased. She'd wanted to approach him, to see if he needed help, but Bobby had a way of making himself invisible. Every time she'd walk toward the bench, he'd somehow melt away into the crowd. But now, holding his Purple Heart medal in her trembling hands, Sarah understood why. This wasn't just any homeless veteran. This was a decorated combat hero who'd been sitting outside a restaurant for years, ignored and dismissed by the very community he'd once served. Sarah's grandfather had served in World War II. He'd told her stories about coming home from the war, about how hard it was to readjust to civilian life. The hardest part wasn't the fighting, he'd said. It was coming home and pretending that everything was normal when you'd seen things that would never be normal again. Looking at Bobby's medal, Sarah felt something break inside her chest. This man had bled for his country. Had saved lives. Had given everything he had to give. And Mario Romano had just thrown him away like trash. Sarah stood up, the Purple Heart clutched in her fist, and walked straight into Romano's Italian kitchen. The lunch rush was in full swing. Waitresses moved between tables, carrying steaming plates of pasta and fresh bread. The familiar sounds of clinking silverware and conversation filled the air. Mario was behind the counter, preparing salads with mechanical precision. He looked up when Sarah approached, offering his usual customer service smile. "Hey there, Sarah. The usual today? Chicken Parmigiana and... Where is he?" Sarah's voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. Mario's smile faltered. "Where's who?" Sarah placed the Purple Heart on the counter with a soft click. The metal caught the light from the overhead fixtures, its purple ribbon faded but dignified. The restaurant went quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Mario stared at the metal, confusion clouding his features. What is that?" "It's a Purple Heart," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "It belongs to the man you just kicked out of here like he was garbage." Mario's face went pale. I didn't know he was." "What? A veteran? A hero?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You just saw a homeless man and decided he wasn't worthy of basic human dignity." An older customer at a nearby table leaned forward. "Did you say Purple Heart? That's for wounded soldiers, right?" Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving Mario's face. "It's awarded to service members who are wounded or killed in action while serving with the U.S. military. This man bled for our country. And you just treated him like a criminal for sitting on a public bench." The weight of her words settled over the restaurant like a heavy blanket. Mario looked around at his customers, seeing judgment in their eyes. Seeing shame reflected back at him. I need to find him," Mario stammered. "I need to apologize." "Do you?" Sarah picked up the medal, its weight somehow heavier than before. "Because this man has been sitting outside your restaurant for years. Years, Mario. And this is the first time you've even acknowledged his existence." But Sarah wasn't finished. She pocketed the medal and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Mario standing behind his counter with the eyes of every customer burning into him. Outside, she looked up and down Oak Street. Bobby was nowhere to be seen. She started walking, checking doorways and alleys, asking other homeless people if they'd seen an older man in an army jacket. Most just shook their heads or looked away. Finally, near the Chicago River, she found him. Bobby was sitting on a concrete barrier, staring out at the water. His duffel bag sat beside him, and his shoulders were hunched against the wind. Sarah approached slowly, the way you might approach a wounded animal. "Excuse me," she said softly. Bobby looked up, and Sarah was struck by the intelligence in his eyes. This wasn't a broken man. This was a man who'd been broken by the world around him. "You dropped this," she said, holding out the Purple Heart. Bobby stared at the medal for a long moment, then looked up at Sarah's face. "You could have kept it. Probably worth something to a collector." "It's not mine to keep," Sarah replied. "And it's worth more than money. It's worth respect." Bobby took the medal, his calloused fingers gentle as he traced the outline of George Washington's profile. "Haven't looked at this thing in years. Used to keep it in a shadow box on my mantelpiece." "What happened?" Sarah asked, settling beside him on the concrete barrier. Bobby was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, slowly, the words started coming. "You ever been to war, miss?" Bobby asked. Sarah shook her head. "Good. It's not a place for decent people." Bobby's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. "I enlisted when I was 18. Thought I was gonna save the world. Gonna fight the good fight." He paused, watching a tugboat push a barge down the river. Vietnam wasn't like the movies. It was hot and wet and confusing. You never knew who was trying to kill you or why. Just knew that if you wanted to see home again, you had to be willing to do things that would haunt you forever. Sarah waited, sensing that this was the first time Bobby had talked about this with anyone. March 15, 1971. We were running supplies to an outpost near Da Nang. Routine convoy. Nothing special. Bobby's hands tightened on the metal. IED took out our lead vehicle. Killed the driver instantly. Flipped our Humvee into a ditch. His voice grew quieter. I could hear my boys screaming inside that burning truck. Radio was dead. No backup coming. Just me and 4 kids who were counting on me to get them home to their families. "So you went back for them," Sarah said. Bobby nodded. 3 times. Pulled out Corporal Martinez first. Kid from Texas, had a picture of his baby daughter taped to his helmet. Then Private Johnson, barely 19, kept talking about his mom's cornbread. Then Sergeant Williams, tough guy from Detroit who cried every time he got a letter from his girlfriend. And the 4th? Bobby's voice broke slightly. Private Chin. Danny Chin. Kid from San Francisco who wanted to be a teacher. I got him out, but the fuel tank went up just as I was pulling him clear. Shrapnel got us both. Sarah looked at Bobby's left leg, understanding now why he favored it. Danny made it home, Bobby continued. Married his high school sweetheart. Became a principal, not just a teacher. Has grandkids now. Sends me a Christmas card every year, even though I never write back. Why don't you write back? Bobby looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. Because heroes don't end up sitting by rivers, talking to strangers about the worst day of their lives. Heroes are supposed to come home and be whole. Be grateful. Be normal. But you did come home, Sarah said gently. And you saved 4 lives. And I lost 1,000 nights of sleep. Lost my wife. Lost my kids. Lost myself. Bobby stood up, wincing as his damaged leg took his weight. This medal isn't a symbol of heroism, miss. It's a reminder that sometimes the cost of saving people is everything you thought you were fighting to protect. Sarah felt tears she hadn't expected burning behind her eyes. What's your name? She asked. Bobby Hayes. Staff Sergeant, 1st Infantry Division. I'm Sarah Martinez. I work for the VA. Bobby's expression didn't change. They can't help me, miss. I'm beyond help. Maybe. But maybe not. Sarah pulled out her phone. Bobby, I want to show you something. She scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for. A photo from last year's Veterans Day ceremony. In the center of the picture stood a middle-aged man in a suit, holding a framed photograph of 4 young soldiers. Do you recognize anyone in this picture? Sarah asked. Bobby studied the phone screen, his eyes narrowing. Then his breath caught. That's Martinez. Corporal Martinez. Dr. Miguel Martinez, Sarah corrected. Runs the pediatric wing at Chicago Children's Hospital. He spoke at our Veterans Day event last year about a sergeant who saved his life in Vietnam. Said he thought about that sergeant every day. Said he wished he could find him and thank him properly. Bobby stared at the phone, his hands shaking slightly. He's looking for you, Bobby. They all are. Every year at the ceremony, Dr. Martinez asks if anyone's heard from Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes. He's never stopped hoping you'd come forward. I can't, Bobby whispered. Look at me. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. You're the man who saved his life, Sarah said firmly. You're the reason Dr. Martinez has been able to save hundreds of children over the past 30 years. You're the reason Sergeant Williams got to raise his 3 daughters. You're the reason Private Johnson got to eat his mom's cornbread for 40 more years. Bobby was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his weathered cheeks. I don't deserve their gratitude, he said. Maybe not, Sarah replied. But they deserve the chance to give it. Meanwhile, back at Romano's Italian kitchen, Mario was having the worst day of his business career. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened. Social media posts were already circulating with the hashtag #PurpleHeartShame. Customers were canceling reservations. Staff members were quitting. But it wasn't the business impact that was eating at Mario. It was the memory of the look in Bobby's eyes when he told him to leave. That quiet acceptance. That dignity in the face of humiliation. Mario had served briefly in the National Guard, but he'd never seen combat. Never faced the kind of situations that forged men like Bobby Hayes. And now, thinking about how he treated a decorated veteran, he felt sick to his stomach. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother Tony's number. You see the news, Mario? Tony's voice was tight with anger. What news? Channel 7 just ran a story about how you kicked a Purple Heart veteran out of your restaurant. It's going viral. You're trending on Twitter, and not in a good way. Mario closed his eyes. I didn't know he was a veteran. He never said anything. He shouldn't have to. Tony exploded. Jesus, Mario, what were you thinking? The man was just sitting on a bench. I know. I screwed up. I need to find him and apologize. You need to do more than apologize, Tony said. You need to make this right. After hanging up, Mario looked around his empty restaurant. The lunch rush that should have filled every table had turned into a ghost town. But for the first time all day, Mario wasn't thinking about his business. He was thinking about a homeless veteran who probably spent the last hour wondering where he was going to sleep tonight. Sarah and Bobby walked back toward Oak Street slowly, taking their time. Bobby hadn't agreed to anything yet, but he hadn't said no either. As they approached Romano's, they could see Mario pacing back and forth in front of his restaurant, his white apron stained with sweat and worry. When he spotted them, Mario's face went pale. He walked toward them with hesitant steps, like a man approaching a funeral. Sir, he began, his voice cracking. I owe you an apology. I owe you more than an apology, but I don't know what else to say. Bobby studied Mario's face for a long moment. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. Yes, I do. Mario's eyes were wet. My grandfather fought in World War II. Landed at Normandy. Came home with shrapnel in his shoulder and nightmares that lasted until the day he died. If someone had treated him the way I treated you. Mario trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Your grandfather come home to a hero's welcome? Bobby asked. No, Mario admitted. He came home to people who didn't want to hear about the war. People who just wanted everything to go back to normal. Bobby nodded. Same story, different war. Don't beat yourself up too bad, son. You're not the first person to look right through me. But I should be the last, Mario said. Sir, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but would you let me buy you dinner? Would you let me try to make this right? Bobby looked at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. I suppose I could eat, Bobby said. 3 hours later, Romano's Italian kitchen was busier than it had been in months. But these weren't regular customers. Word had spread through the veteran community about Bobby Hayes. Dr. Miguel Martinez had driven straight from the hospital when Sarah called him. He sat across from Bobby now, tears streaming down his face, holding the hand of the man who'd saved his life 47 years ago. I named my son after you, Dr. Martinez said. Roberto Miguel Martinez. He's a firefighter now in San Antonio. Saves people, just like his namesake. Sergeant James Williams had flown in from Detroit. He was a grandfather now, successful contractor, pillar of his community. But sitting next to Bobby, he was just a scared 19-year-old kid again, grateful to be alive. My daughters, he said, showing Bobby pictures on his phone. My grandkids. They all exist because you didn't give up on me that day. Private Danny Chen, now Dr. Daniel Chen, had driven from Milwaukee where he was superintendent of schools. He brought his grandson, a 10-year-old boy who stared at Bobby with wide eyes. Tell him about the hero, Grandpa Chen, the boy whispered. Dr. Chen's voice was thick with emotion. This is the hero, Tommy. This is the man I told you about. The one who taught me that real courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. Mario had closed the restaurant to regular customers for the evening. He served course after course of his best dishes, refusing to let anyone pay. Local news crews gathered outside, but Mario wouldn't let them in. This isn't about publicity, he told them. This is about respect. As the evening wore on, more veterans arrived. Men and women who'd heard about Bobby's story and wanted to pay their respects. Each one saluted when they met him. Each one called him Sergeant or Sir. Bobby, overwhelmed by the attention, kept trying to deflect the praise. I just did my job, he insisted. No, Dr. Martinez said firmly. You did more than your job. You did what was right. And we never forgot. 6 months later, Bobby Hayes moved into a small apartment 3 blocks from Romano's Italian kitchen. The apartment was paid for by the Bobby Hayes Foundation, a nonprofit started by Dr. Martinez and his fellow survivors. The foundation provided housing, medical care, and counseling services for homeless veterans. Its motto, printed on every piece of literature, was simple: no one gets left behind. Bobby became the foundation's first counselor. Turned out, a man who'd spent 23 years on the streets had a lot to teach other veterans about survival. About hope. About the difference between being broken and being defeated. Mario Romano became the foundation's first corporate sponsor. Every Tuesday, he delivered free meals to the foundation's facility. And every Tuesday, Bobby sat at his old bench outside Romano's, not as a homeless man begging for scraps, but as a friend sharing lunch with someone who'd learned the difference between seeing and truly seeing. The Purple Heart? Bobby donated it to the Chicago Veterans Museum, along with a letter explaining why. This medal doesn't belong to me, he wrote. It belongs to everyone who serves. Everyone who sacrifices. Everyone who comes home different than they left. But mostly, it belongs to the people who remember that behind every uniform, behind every medal, behind every story of service, there's a human being who deserves dignity. Who deserves respect. Who deserves to be seen. The museum display includes a photo of Bobby on his bench, a picture of the 4 men he saved, and a simple plaque that reads, "True heroism isn't measured in moments of glory. It's measured in decades of quiet dignity." And every Veterans Day, for successful men gather at Romano's Italian kitchen to share a meal with the man who taught them that coming home isn't about forgetting where you've been. It's about finding people who help you remember who you still are. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget this story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to True Stories Zone, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost. Have you ever seen someone judge a veteran unfairly? Tell us your story in the comments. And remember, every person carrying invisible wounds deserves our respect, not our judgment. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.